It is time for our featured speaker, who we just had a little preview from. It is my pleasure to introduce Christian Waguespack, the Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Mexican Museum of Art, Blood, and Contemporary. Christian has joined the museum in 2017, and since that time, he's organized more than a dozen exhibitions and conducts research on the museum's collection, focusing on modern art and the art of the American Southwest. He has lectured all across the country on American modernism and Southwest art history. And this morning, it's our great pleasure to welcome you.
So I want to thank you all for being here this morning. I want to thank Creative Mornings for inviting me to be part of this exciting program. I want to especially thank Iconic Coffee because I am a morning person. But for this wonderful group of people, nothing is too much to ask. So when Alex Hanna, the fine gentleman there in the canary yellow shirt, approached me and asked if I would be part of this program and speak on the subject of RIPER, and I said, of course I will. I'd be happy to do that. Well, what do you want to talk about? I've got to talk about New Mexico art history because that's what I do. And then I got to think, okay, well, that is such a huge, broad topic. How am I going to corral it into the time that we have here? And then I got to think about all of you. Every single person in this room, artists, sculptors, performers, musicians, designers, creatives, writers, poets, you all constitute a Santa Fe creative community. And whether you know it or not, you're part of a century-long lineage of groups of people coming together and creating an impact on the community here that's much greater than the sum of the individual parts of each person. And so I thought, that's what I'll talk about. The artistic communities that came together over the past century to make New Mexico a place that's renowned around the world for its arts and its art history. I'm an art historian by trade. My bread and butter is the 20th century. But we can't talk about art history in New Mexico without looking back, way back, to the indigenous people who've been here forever, creating works of art, works of architecture, pottery, petroglyphs, monuments like Chaco Canyon that rival anything you're going to see anywhere in the world. You can't talk about New Mexico art history without talking about the Hispano communities who've been creating amazing works of art here in northern New Mexico with a distinct perspective for over 4 centuries. But that's not my area of expertise. My area of expertise is New Mexico, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I want to get started with this group. What I'm showing you here is a photograph of the Taos Society of Artists. And what I'm showing you here on this side is a broke-down wagon. Now, why is a broke-down wagon important to New Mexico art history? If it were not for a faulty wagon wheel and 2 gentlemen who had no business taking a trek across the West, many of us probably wouldn't be sitting here in this room today. Berger Phillips and Ernest Blumenschein were 2 adventurous young artists who decided to set out from Denver on their way to Mexico City to make a life as artists in Mexico. They made it from Denver to Taos. Their wagon broke down. They had no idea what to do with themselves. They flipped a coin to see who would take the wheel into Taos to get it fixed. And this is, here I'm showing you, sitting on the side of the road with their can of beans, broken down wagon. They go to town, get back and say, you know what, I think we've gone far enough. This is They settle, and over time, this entire group of artists comes and joins them. And they form the first kind of self-conscious artist group in New Mexico. And by that, I mean, there's certainly not the first community of people working artistically in New Mexico. We know that, we've had that forever. But they're the first group of people who came together and made the conscious decision to say, we are going to form a mutual support organization so we can live and work here just as artists and support one another. They made works like this. So all of the members of the Taos Society, except for one person, were trained in the academic tradition in Europe, which means that they looked at the human models, they drew realistically, and they created these constructed romanticized tableaus, and that's what they brought with them. And that's what kind of informed the look of Taos Society art. Now, in Europe, as a group of Americans, they were getting really sick of European material. And we've got letters of them saying, if I have to paint one more Dutch windmill, I'm going to give this whole thing. So one of the things that this group of people were looking for And not just them, but many American artists who had to go to Europe to study because the state of art education in the United States wasn't really as respected as it could have been at that time, was wanting to make work about the place that they're from. And the thought at that time was, Americans look west for their identity, and we find it there. So they came out to Taos, began working on making these lovely paintings. And by the way, both of these are on view at the New Mexico Museum of Art on the Plaza. So if you want to go see them, please go do that. They look much better in person. Realistic portraits of the kind of people that they would have met in Taos. So here we have E. Irving Taos' Taos Pueblo Moonlight. He was a master at nocturne painting, which is a lot harder than most people might think it is. And then Berkfield Phillips, Our Washerwoman's Family. And they created these pieces that were realistic, that were large. And if you could imagine, during Taos at this time, there wouldn't have been a huge market for this sort of thing, right? I mean, you could only probably sell one or two of these before the people who were buying large paintings were like, okay, well, fine, that's enough. Go went their own way. So that. All right, well, we'll end up there eventually. So the reason they came together as a group was not only to have a artistically enriched community of people, but also to support each other financially. They would sell a piece, they would split up the profits. Another group that was existing in Taos at almost the exact same time as the church. Oh, wait a minute. I wanted to say one more thing about the Taos Society of Artists. So they've been around forever. We all know this work, whether or not we know this work. What's exciting about them today? What as a curator are we looking for to tell new stories? Well, I wanted to say that one of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of Taos Society scholarship are that younger scholars and people who are working on this material now are taking a fresh look at the people in those paintings. Lots of papers, books, research being done on who those individual models are, what their stories are, who their families are. And that's something that I'm excited about learning a bit more of. And we've been able to work with colleagues at the London Research Center in Taos and other scholars to identify all of the people in our paintings and learn their stories. So not just the stories of the artists that are interesting, but the stories of the people they're depicting, telling a more holistic idea of what life was like in New Mexico during that time. Okay, Transcendental Painting Group. Completely different look. And here I've got a picture of those folks. And if the lighting was a little bit better, you'd be able to see that front and center, one of my favorite artists, a little kitty. So they're holding a kitty cat there as an honorary member of the group. But these folks are doing something completely different. They were interested in artwork that transcended the physical world, making art that doesn't look like anything in particular, but was about ideas of spirituality. And they each kind of took this in their own direction. Some of them worked with sacred geometry, some of them worked with kind of more loosey-goosey astronomical stuff, which is really beautiful and lovely. And here I'm showing you on top a painting of the youngest member of the group, Florence Miller Pierce, her 1952 work that's in our collection. And on the bottom, the oldest member of the group, Agnes Pelton, who created this portrait, Awakening Memory of My Father. And you can kind of get a sense of where these artists are kind of towing the line between reality and abstraction. If you look at the profile of that mountain, you see the profile of a face, and she made that to be her father, who was this deeply complicated individual. We don't really have time to go into that, but it's an interesting story. And here that trumpet is supposed to be this kind of angelic calling and awakening. So this is her kind of using artwork to work through her own trauma, her own personal history in interesting ways that we relate to now very easily. But during this time, this was revolutionary. Abstraction really hadn't hit the United States quite as hard yet. Non-objective art was something that people were playing with in Europe. Spiritualism in art, Wassily Kandinsky was writing concerning the spiritual in art. This was very popular over there. But for one of the very first entirely American groups to be working with this approach to art, to be located in Taos, New Mexico, is extraordinary, because this wasn't something that had taken full root in New York yet. And what I find even more extraordinary is that you had work like this in a community like this happening right next door to people who are doing work like the Taos Society of Artists. Mabel Dodge Lujan. I hear giggling. Some of you must be familiar with her. Quite a character. A New York socialite. Is she? Huh? Yeah, we'll get to Frida. New York socialite. Underwrote the Armory Show, which is credited with bringing modernism to the attention of American artists for the first time in a significant way. Alfred Stieglitz was showing it before that, but we won't split hairs here. She moved to Florence. She had a salon of artists there. Then she came back to America and she had a vision. And I mean, she literally believed she had like a Raven Simone-esque vision, where she was visited by a spirit character who told her, you must go to Taos. Her husband was getting a little bit tired of her at this point, so he said, you know what, you really should go. She went, she stayed, and she created a salon in Taos. I don't mean a hair salon, I mean a group of creative people she brought with her from back east. She would invite any creative person that she thought was interesting, be they a writer, be they an artist, be they a cook. She was really specific about cook, to come to Taos and to live with her for some time and to just be there, live for free, and make work. That was all you had to do. She was herself a writer and an art critic. You can read her own art criticism and make your calls there. And here I'm showing her, this photograph is called The Three Graces. So you've got Mabel with her distinctive bob and bangs. You've got Frida Lawrence with her fantastic cigarette. And Dorothy Brett, who kind of looks like a pilot to me on the left, which is running her around. And then I'm showing you a photograph of Rebecca Salisbury Strand James and Georgia O'Keeffe. There's two examples of the people that would come and stay with her. She kind of got her claws into Georgia. When Georgia came to New Mexico, she did not intend to stay with Mabel Dodge. But when Mabel Dodge heard that Georgia O'Keeffe was here, she whisked her away and brought her to Los Gallos, which is her home there. It's still there. You can visit it. They hold a conference, the Southwest Art History Conference, every year in October if you want to learn more about this stuff. But you can also just stay there in her room and be haunted by Mabel's ghost all night. So I would recommend doing that. But she created this epicenter of creative, modernist, and forward-thinking individuals in Taos. And again, all of this happening at the same time. And these are the kind of works that those artists would make. So here I'm showing you Black Cross by Georgia O'Keeffe. In 1929, which was O'Keeffe's first serious trip to New Mexico, the first thing that she started looking to was not the landscape, was not skulls, was not flowers. It was these crosses. And was it because O'Keeffe had a spiritual awakening? No. It was because there was a morada, a penitente morada, in the back of Mabel's house. And there was penitente crosses there. And for her, seeing these symbols of Hispanic New Mexico was the primary indicator of what this part of the country meant to her. And she did this first series of crosses. Dorothy Brett, Fiesta of the Foot Races. Here she's painting a scene from Taos Pueblo. So we have this kind of record of a dance happening. But when you look at the figures on the top, she's arranged them with this really beautiful color gradient. So we see this look to just form and pattern and color and repetition that gets blown up in more modern work. And later she starts making these completely abstract pieces that I find very interesting. And then Rebecca James, I know we're not supposed to have favorites, but Rebecca James is one of the artists that's really kind of touched me over the years that I've worked here with her. I'd recommend looking into her if you don't have time to go into her today. She was best known for reverse painting on glass, which was a very difficult thing to do. Other male artists in the modernist circle had tried it, didn't succeed in doing it, and wrote letters to her saying, well, you know, we tried and we couldn't do it. You're not going to, but good luck. She mastered the technique, made some of the most beautiful examples of reverse painting on glass that we have today. There's one up at the Museum on the Plaza if you want to see it in person, and you really should, because they're crisp and luminous, vibrant, and just a real treat. But the other medium that she picked up was colcha embroidery, which is a traditional Spanish colonial textile practice that was falling a little bit out of popularity whenever she landed in Taos. And she became interested in what she saw. And in addition to making this work herself, she also set up workshops where she would provide space and materials for people from the community to come together and learn this technique. And so helped kind of breathe life back into it. I wouldn't say that she's solely responsible for a renaissance of it, because that was the members of that particular Hispano community who picked it back up. But she provided space, she provided materials, and she shed some light and interest back on it. And if this is something that looks interesting to you, you can visit a colcha circle that still happens today at the Nuevo Mexicano Heritage Arts Museum up on Museum Hill, and it's a lot of fun. And if I didn't have to work during the day, I would be there myself. And so here I'm showing you The Stoic by Joseph Henry Sharp, one of the Taos Society painters, and Light by Raymond Johnson, one of the founders of the Transcendental Painting Group, just a couple years apart, to reinforce what is amazing to me, that a community as small as Taos, this early in the century, had space and the community support for both of these sorts of things to happen at the exact same time. But art wasn't just happening in Taos, and oh, that's a laser. Community building. Oh, wait, I wanted to bring this in too. This I like to put together. One of my dream projects is looking at just 1 year of New Mexican art history and showing the scope of work that was happening here. This is 1917. If you just look at 1917, the work that was made here in 1917, you have Robert Henright bringing the Ashcan School and American realism to Santa Fe and his paintings of indigenous subjects where it was important for him that they would pose themselves and they always had names. That was a step forward from the kind of thing that you would find in the Tau Society where the sitters were very rarely named. That's why this look into who those models were is so important today. You have Henry C. Balling's Pueblo pottery. He was a Dutch painter who was trained in Dutch still life, moved to New York, saw a Western poster in the subway, and decided, I'm going to move to Taos and become a painter. And he did. And he wasn't allowed to be a member of the Taos Society of Artists because they only accepted Americans. So they actually signed a petition to get him deported. Here I'm showing you Warren E. Rawlings' wreath at the bottom. This is on view at the museum now. If you want to see a really great selection of his work, go to the bar at Bishop's Lodge, and they have a fantastic selection of his material. Because it's held up, there's a reason I can't do an exhibition about him, so I'm a little salty about that. But the drinks are good, so way too much. He was called the dean of the Santa Fe Art Colony. So he was somebody who came here and organized the community as an educator. It made space for young artists to come through and learn painting from here. Josie Nussbaum's Santa Fe style double, and that should say covered. We're seeing people looking at Spanish colonial anthropology, pairing that with the trend that was going on in the United States with the arts and crafts movement, and making a style that was unique to here, that was both modern and historic at the same time, and remarkable. This is also on view at the museum, though I keep wanting to take it home. It won't fit in my car. Santa Fe Hills, Leon Kroll, you see the influence of European movements. You see the influence of Cezanne here, for instance. So you've got that modernism coming in. And Pueblo Dancer by Jan Matulka. If you can imagine an artist from the Czech Republic who got on a boat and got on a train and just came to New Mexico before you could Google what this place even was, making almost completely abstract work like this here. And that's also on view at the plaza right now. What else happened in 1917? Santa Fe got its first contemporary art museum. This is the New Mexico Museum of Art, our other building on the plaza. Here's a modern picture of it. Here's a historic picture of it. This was the brainchild of Edgar Lee Hewitt, but the programming was the brainchild of Robert Henright. This was New Mexico's first contemporary art space. In 1917, the museum was opened with the idea that New Mexico was recently becoming a state, and one of the things that was important to put our best foot forward was we were a place for the arts. Originally, Hewitt was an archaeologist and anthropologist, and looking at places like Chaco Canyon and the other sites that we have here in New Mexico, he envisioned our museum to be something like establishing New Mexico as the United States' answer to Egypt, which we laugh at today, but it's not that far-fetched. Luckily, he met Robert Henright, who was a member of the Ashcan School and one of the most important arts educators in the United States during this time. And Henright convinced him that that was a really stupid idea, and that what New Mexico needed was a contemporary space that would draw artists to the West. And so that's what we got. We got a contemporary art museum that had space for artists to work. So any artist that came through New Mexico could sign up for a studio space at the museum to work there, have their work shown. And this began to build up a critical mass of modern and contemporary artists coming to Santa Fe and making their life here, either making work for a season or staying for the rest of their life. Of course, we've tried to remain a contemporary art museum throughout the past century. Some of what was contemporary back then is now historic. That's why we have the bottom contemporary to keep that going. But that's the legacy, and that's one of the things that, for me, excites me about working at this museum. That many American museums, their collections are founded on the collections of individual people who had brought material together and then donated it. Our museum, our city's museum and our state's museum, is founded on the vision of artists who came here, created work, and then donated that work to keep that legacy here. So we currently have some of the best examples of the Taos Society painters up in our collection because those people thought, this is my local museum, and this is what I want to leave to represent my legacy. And that's really important. Here's an example of some of the artists that Hewitt brought together to work at the museum early on. Kenneth Chapman, Donald Beauregard, Carlos Vieira, Sheldon Parsons, and of course, Robert Henright. But in addition to kind of these easel painters, right, artists who would come and work in the studio, she was an early champion of making sure that Indigenous art was seen on the same footing as American modernism. During the museum's early days, we had a fantastic collection of Pueblo painting and other materials. Oh no, I have such little time left. He wanted to show that on equal footing with American art. So even though institutions like the Smithsonian American Art Museum have only just recently in the past decade integrated their Indigenous and American collection, we've been doing it here for over a century. And I bring in this painting to show you Maria Martinez, Mape here. We had early on before they got transferred to the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture, over 160 of his paintings that Hewitt created and showed. This is one of my favorite photographs that I just discovered last week. Maria Martinez and Vincent Price. When I'm not being an arts cheerleader, I'm also a horror fanatic. I was overjoyed. And I want a cardboard cutout of them there. I'm going to skip ahead just a little bit because I want to get to, well, I want to mention before I do, in this vein, institutions like IAIA, opening here, bringing together the best of the best of contemporary Indigenous artists, breaking the mold on what Indigenous art was during that time, taking the reins of their own story, integrating traditional arts with modernism and contemporary practices. This is a painting from the museum's collection. It's currently on view in the governor's mansion right now, but we have the faculty of IAIA represented there. And moving forward, okay, so thinking through this history of the past, oh no. Yeah. There we go. We're going to do this the old-fashioned way. What next? So I've talked to you about the early part of the 20th century, but that's only half. Our next exhibition here at the Vlad of Contemporary is looking at the art of New Mexico from the 1970s through 2000. So one of the things that our museum has done pretty robustly that I'm proud of is telling the story of New Mexico art over and over again from different points of view. And we've done a fantastic job for the early part of the 20th century. But now that we have this new contemporary space, it's not just for showing art, it's also for collecting art. And one of the things that surprised me that I should have known when we opened this building was the Vlad Contemporary New Mexico Museum of Art is the only contemporary collecting institution in Santa Fe without a kind of specific focus, right? So not only collecting contemporary Hispano art, not only collecting contemporary Native art, not only collecting new media art, but collecting across the board. And that's important. We're here to collect those stories, to preserve those stories, and to champion those stories. We've done it for a while, up until about World War II, but now it's time to look at writing that history moving forward. And this is a time in our history that we haven't really paid very much attention to in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now is the time. So this next exhibition here is going to be telling that next story, and having the Vladam, having this space is allowing us to do that in a way that just the Plaza space couldn't. So what you're going to experience is opening June 8th. And because this is such a big project, we've got over 150 artists that are going to be represented in this one exhibition. We've broken it up into different parts. So even though this is one show, you come back 3 different times, you're going to see 3 completely different installations of this building. And they're organized, every curator who works at our museum has had a hand in putting this together. And we each took the group of artists that we had decided on, mostly from our collection, and decided to look at them and tell the story of the art during this time from these different points of view: place, spectacle, and identity. The first installation that you're going to see, I worked on. It's getting hung right now, so you can peep through windows and see some of it, but you got to come back on the 8th to see the whole thing. Is looking at place. And here I'm showing you just a few examples of what you can see there. We took pretty broad sweeps at this. So for instance, Agnes Martin, an artist that people don't really associate with landscape, but we found letters where she's talking about coming down out of the mountains and landing on a plane and thinking, wow, this is it, I've arrived. Which is the opposite of most of us, right? We like to look at the mountains and think this is the beauty of New Mexico. Her, she's like, nope, I like these horizontal lines, and that's what I'm going to do. T.C. Cannon, another important IAI artist who are looking at complicating our understanding of the politics of the land that we're on right now. And this is his fantastic piece metal Indian painting. Louise Jimenez, Border Crossing. This southwestern land is a place of migration, has been for centuries, still is. Telling the important stories of families who've crossed the border to come here, families who've been here forever. And Federico Vigil, a contemporary artist who's looking at the deep traditions of the communities who've lived in New Mexico for centuries and turning that to a subject for contemporary art. We've got some new additions to the collection I'm very excited about. Delmas Howe. This painting just came into our collection a few months ago. So there was another painting planned for the show. Then we were offered this one. I said, switch them. One of the things we got to do with this project is oral history interviews with many of the artists who are still alive. And talking with Delmas, he said this is the most important piece he ever did, because this is the piece that he made to honor his partner who died of complications from HIV. And here you see that perfect kind of Delmas Howell integration of the southern New Mexican landscape and his love and appreciation for cowboy culture and Truth or Consequences, where he was born and grew up. Rick Dillingham, gas can, an important historian and potter, another figure who sadly died of AIDS. We've got a retrospective of his work at the Plaza Museum right now that I highly recommend checking out. Luis Tapia's Chama Altar, bringing together a contemporary twist on traditional Hispano art and lowrider culture. And Patrick Nagatani and another group of artists who are complicating the state's nuclear history. These are just a handful of the themes that we're going to be exploring in this exhibition. It's going to be running for over a year. Like I said, come back because it will completely deinstall and completely reinstall. No artist is getting shown twice, no piece is getting shown twice. So you'll see 3 exhibitions for the experience of one. And I could keep going on forever, but I know we might have questions. Questions?
For questions. So who has the first question for Kristen?
Ma'am,
Are you writing a book?
we're not writing a book.
You should.
I'm writing a couple of books right now, but this isn't one of them. One of the books I'm writing is a monograph on the Santa Fe artist named Eugenie Chenard, who was well known during her own life, but after she passed away, kind of fell off the map of art history. She donated the museum's foundation building to us. That's the Chenard House. And when she passed away, she didn't have children and didn't have anyone to really take her legacy. So all of her artwork and all of her papers came to the museum. So we're trying to shed some new light on her story. And another one is a catalog on Gustav Bauman for next. Now I know we all love Bauman. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Who was the, you said you wanted a cutout of the.
Yeah.
It's Vincent Price
Yeah,
and Maria Martinez.
yeah, that's amazing.
Isn't that great?
It's great.
You know, I also just found last month that he did a commercial for the Albuquerque Museum. He was so his background was in art history. He studied art history. He was an art enthusiast, and he was a particularly enthusiastic champion for Native art. So he would come here to collect pieces for himself and for other museums, and to just bolster the arts community here. So he was a fan. Anybody else? Yeah, we can talk about Vincent Price. Yes, ma'am.
I'm so interested in the Taos artist group. They're kind of utopian collected, but then we also saw their kind of exclusionary events when it came to the Dutch Hall. How did that shake out? Did they fall apart?
They eventually disbanded formally, but they all still live together. I mean, this is the thing about Santa Fe and Taos during this time. It's so small that there really is no like, you can't disappear into the crowd of New York. They came together primarily, you know, for that financial support, right? So they could have the financial backing to stay and live in Taos. And after a while, they realized they kind of didn't need it. They were organizing shows on their own. But they all, you know, you go up to Taos now and you can visit all of their houses. They're all in walking distance. They stayed together for the most part. They were a cast of characters too.
I really appreciated you bringing up the New Mexico Museum of Art started off with like contemporary artists and giving them space to create. Do you see that happening here at this museum or?
Thank you for asking that question. Yeah. So this practice kind of fell off for us at the Plaza building just for matters of practicality, right? What was artist spaces got filled with collections and offices and things like that. But with the opening of the bottom, one of the things that we're able to have now that we didn't have before, classroom spaces like this, but an artist in residency studio, which is upstairs on the second floor. And we're kind of trying to bring this practice back alive with reinvigorating the artist in residency program. We have Mocha Leger in studio right now. She has public hours. You can go visit her. You'll see her working there. Her work is exhibited upstairs. And that's something that now that we have that space, we can bring back in, and we're really happy to do so. We've been working primarily with local artists for the first few, but we'll be bringing in artists from Taiwan over the summer. So kind of experimenting with those borders and boundaries. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, I was going to ask you, is there a plan to bring back the Alcoves program, which did highlight local artists? rotation basis for, a few weeks at a time?
So that's a good question. So we're being asked by one of our docents from the museum, so she knows, about the Alcoves program, which was a program that we ran at the Plaza building for many, many years, where we would have a much more kind of robust rotation of contemporary artists, each one getting their own alcove. That was the modern kind of revitalization of the early open alcoves project that the museum had in 1917. We don't have any plans to revisit that in the Plaza building, but we're looking at ways to reimagine that in new ways here, right? So the alcoves program was a reimagining of what that original artist's public space was like. Here, one of the ways we're doing that is with the installation window, which is a much more kind of robust rotation of local artists who are doing installations there. And that's right outside the door if you want to take a look. And then with the art and public spaces here at the museum, we're looking at kind of bringing in contemporary people at a more vigorous pace than we can do for a full exhibition. And we're also open for ideas. Yes, sir.
You think you'll ever bring to light any of that?
I don't know. We'll see. Write me letters. So I can say we're going to do letters. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
The transcendental paintings at school, I'm not familiar with. Do you know if they were influenced by some of the patterns on Pueblo pottery, which are rather stylized also?
Yeah, they were. Well, so one of the things I really like about the transcendental painting group is that they all were based around this core idea of non-objective art and art that related to the human spirit, but they all went about it in their own special way. So if you look at the full bodies of work of these different people, you can see that they were looking at designs of Pueblo pottery, particularly in El Bistro was one who was looking at doing that. Other ones, maybe not so much, but they were certainly looking at what was around them for inspiration. And they're a group that, is only now just starting to get attention. There was a traveling exhibition of their work that went around the US and went through Albuquerque recently. And then there was another one at almost the exact same time of Agnes Pelton that we took at the Plaza Museum. So the rest of America is kind of waking up to these people, even though we've been exhibiting them since 1938. No, before. Yes, sir.
So I'm not familiar with Bess Harris. Was she a painter or a photographer?
Bess Harris was a painter.
Okay.
But, some of the folks, this group is a little bit more loose.
Yeah.
So some came, some went, some we know, some we're just rediscovering. A good example of a rediscovery that came through this traveling exhibition is Robert Gribrock, who was a painter that I didn't know very much about. There aren't many of his paintings left. I have him up in an exhibition that's at the Plaza Museum now. It's looking at the history of gay and lesbian art in New Mexico from 1900 to 1969, so that early history. And he did these beautiful kind of magical realist paintings. And what's really interesting about him is that once he was done in New Mexico, he moved to LA. And if you go look at the painting in the Plaza, I want you to take a close look at the landscape on the bottom. And there are these very kind of thin strips of bright neon color. And they're going to look familiar to you because anybody who's seen Bugs Bunny and Wile E. Coyote, but he is the artist who left New Mexico, went to LA, and painted those backgrounds. And it was a member of the transfer that introduced the first kind of idea of the West. I mean, for me, the first time I ever heard about Albuquerque was when Bugs Bunny took the World Fair. So when I saw it, I was like, wow, these stories that we don't know.
That's great. Kristen, we could go on.